Hi, my name is Scott Stancell-Condron. Welcome to my podcast, Grief, I Love Tim, Episode 5. Unfortunately, I can't report that I'm doing a lot better. Today in particular, which is August the 2nd, was a really shitty day. I really didn't sleep last night, and when I did, I woke up frequently, a couple times crying. I miss him more today than I did 2 weeks ago, or 3 weeks ago, or a week ago. I don't know if it's because it's been 2 months since he passed away, over 2 months. It just makes me sad. My heart hurts. So I was at my sister's, got there yesterday to help celebrate her birthday. Made it through yesterday, but like I said, I didn't sleep. I got up, I went to Starbucks to get coffee, cried all the way to Starbucks, cried all the way back, met everyone for breakfast, which was kind of late, and then just kind of after breakfast, I was like, I just need to go back home to the desert. Loaded up the dog, and back we came to a place that's a lot more familiar surrounding. Even though I love my sister and I love my brother and I love being at their house, today just wasn't the day for me to be there. Today I want to talk about healthcare and implied bias and grief in the LGBTQ plus community. For years, before and even after equal marriage, our relationships have often been discounted or diminished. There's a persistent undercurrent where people equate sex with gay relationships. And while that can be part of any relationship, reducing our love to just that makes it easier for someone to diminish the depth of our bonds and the weight of our grief when we lose someone. I can't speak for everyone in the LGBTQ plus community, and I don't know if all relationships are discounted in the same way, but as a gay man, I have felt this dismissal. It's subtle sometimes, but it's there. Grief, death, and bereavement are topics in general that people avoid because they're uncomfortable and because eventually they'll happen to all of us. But for those of us in the LGBTQ plus community, I haven't really seen any safe spaces or welcoming spaces to be honest and to express grief like, hey, I just had a shitty day because Tim died, right? And if you do express that, a lot of times it's awkward and uncomfortable for others. So my question is, why do I care? I don't know, maybe because I'm human. The other things that I keep finding myself in the situation as I try to put myself out there without any of the grief or any of the issues is that I say we a lot, and I have to make a choice. Do I gloss over it or tell the truth? Usually I'll refer to Tim in conversation using we, but when someone asks, what does your husband do? Or I can't wait to meet your spouse, I have to say, he died. And out of 7 or 8 times that's happened, only once did the person respond with warmth. The others, they recoiled, changed the subject, or kind of just drifted away, both straight and gay people. And then there are things like implied bias that come into medical care. I've been in situations for my personal medical care where the nurse practitioner, nurse, or doctor gave a disappointing stare when they found out I was gay. That was during the pandemic, the beginning of the pandemic, and that was as recently as a month ago. And remember, for the last 20 years or so, I've lived in very gay parts of very gay-friendly states, namely California and Massachusetts. The doctors that helped to take care of Tim were really concerned about him having pneumocystis pneumonia, which is an HIV-related disease. It's actually a fungus. Even though we told the doctor that he had had pneumocystis 30 years ago and that the antibodies were still there, they persisted. I talked about our time in New Mexico in an earlier episode, and it was the same song. Tim had a pulmonologist in New Mexico that kept testing him for pneumocystis pneumonia. All the while, the assumption was that he had pneumocystis, which means he wasn't getting treated for what he actually did have. And in New Mexico and here in the desert, there was some implied bias because Tim was gay and HIV positive. As in New Mexico and here in the desert, they said it was either fungus or fungi, or it was pneumocystis, which is also a fungus. A battery of tests that included everything you can think of, including the bubonic plague, all came back negative. So giving him steroids would not help, was kind of the general consensus, certainly in New Mexico. They, as a last resort, they gave him steroids, which helped with the inflammation in his lungs and so forth, and he got better. Unfortunately, we never found out what he had. Here in the desert, they didn't want to give him steroids for basically the same reasons, because they help fungi grow in some cases. We begged and pleaded, and they gave him to him for 36 hours, and they said, well, he's not getting better. And I was like, well, is he getting worse? And the answer was no. We printed off the doctor's notes from the portal in New Mexico, and showed them the New Mexico's doctor notes, that showed that the steroids helped to get him better. So there was a doctor that I talked about in an earlier episode who used Lord Tennyson's quote about it's better to have loved than to have not loved at all, or something like that. But so the day before that he actually used that, he told me that he had talked to our doctors in Boston, our meaning my doctors and Tim's doctors, and that we were really good patients. We lived a good, clean lifestyle, that we took our meds, that we stayed on regimens. And I looked at him with a blank stare, and I said, so you're making the assumption that I'm HIV positive because Tim is? He stammered and stuttered, and he was like, oh no, I didn't mean it. And I just looked at him with a smirk. There are a lot of couples, like Tim and myself, that consist of one person that was HIV positive and another that's not. There's even a name for us. We're called serodiscordant couples. So because I'm gay and my husband has HIV, and maybe because I'm of a certain age, because I was of that age when the pandemic started, he made an assumption. My thought was, wow, if I have a heart attack in front of him, would that affect my care from him? Did it affect Tim's care? Just for the record, I'm over 60, I'm not HIV positive, I don't have a piercing nor a tattoo. And I mention this because, again, as recently as a month ago, I had a doctor mention that to me. And I've had it mentioned to me several times since I've turned 60 and before I turned 60. But the point is that they think I'm a unicorn, and that because I don't have any of those things, and because of my age. So I think that's implicit bias. So they treat me like I'm a unicorn in some circumstances. And then there was Tim's death certificate. It listed 3 causes of death. One was cardiac arrest. The other was cardiogenic shock. And finally, community-acquired pneumonia. And for good measure, the doctor also listed other significant conditions: human immunodeficiency virus, or HIV. None of these were caused by HIV. So it truly was not an underlying factor. This same doctor, we had given a disc from New Mexico with Tim's scans so they could compare those till now. We also could pull up his information and his scans from Boston on what's called the Patient Gateway, which is an Epic product. We gave those to them when he went back into the hospital the second time on the first day. They said, oh, we'll get the disc uploaded and we'll get the stuff from Boston. Well, Thursday before he died on Memorial Day, they still hadn't seen them. And so I talked to the head pulmonologist, who this particular guy had worked for. And the head pulmonologist says, yeah, I have a disk drive up in my office. Let me go up and look at it. And then he came back down and he said, do you have anything from Boston? I said, well, let me pull up the gateway. So I pull it up on my personal computer and show him this information. So in earnest that day, I truly believe they were trying to save his life. But it took him 8 days to look at the information. So in earnest, they had given him 16 IVs, 2 wonderful nurses that were putting things in order of what took the longest to react and what was the quickest. Again, there were still no steroids. So, you know, what does one believe? It takes 8 days to look at scans by this doctor, and then his boss is able to pull him up that same in an instant. So, on a better note, I think from a bureaucratic standpoint, for most LGBTQ plus people, things have improved. I mean, simply because we have rights, marriage equality. You know, I didn't have to show any papers that we were married. I was allowed to make decisions because Tim had, you know, obviously listed me, you know, as part of that. But I also realized for the trans community, from what I've seen and read and heard, that we've maybe taken a few steps backwards. But back in the 80s and 90s, I had friends that could not make decisions for their partners, or sometimes were banned from going to the hospital to visit their partners by their partners' families. And in 2 cases, they banned my friends whose partner had just passed away from even going to their funerals. Now, understand I lived in a more conservative place at the time, in Tennessee and in North Carolina. I didn't have to deal with losing the spouse in that time. I can only imagine the additional hurdles and hoops that people had to jump over or dive through just to be with their partner when they passed, or to make the decisions that they knew that their partner wanted, even if it was in writing, even if it was notarized, it happened. So unfortunately, I know that none of this matters for me, and it's not going to bring Tim back. My heart is truly broken, and it's broken for many reasons. But one was because Tim worked tirelessly as a patient advocate for people who had small cell lung cancer or HIV. Even though I and my sister, who's a nurse, and one of our nieces from Boston, who doesn't take no for an answer, were advocating for him, it seemed like he fell between the cracks of everything that he advocated for. his oldest friend from Scranton, or they grew up in Scranton together, flew out, and she was advocating too. So 6 months prior, Tim had said, hey, I would like to donate my brain, spinal cord, and spinal fluid to research. And there were 2 places we could do it, UCSD and Mass General in Boston. It was time sensitive and all kinds of things. So, when it became very evident that he was not going to make it, I contacted his neurologist in Boston and said, and she had been in contact, so she knew. We want to donate this, and so she got us set up. But so the irony of all ironies is that Tim passes away on Memorial Day. I signed, I don't know how many different papers at the hospital for the people we were donating, the organization we were donating to at UCSD. And I get a call at like 4:30 in the morning that the hospital we were at here in the desert wouldn't release Tim's body. So having just had my husband pass at 6:22 p.m. the day before, having not slept, I got up, went to the hospital, had to track down the person in the morgue to sign a paper that I'd already signed, but they only had a photographic copy of it. They needed a wet ink signature. This is 2025. So in Tim's patient advocacy, he spoke to medical staff at various facilities in Boston, notably Dana-Farber, which is a world-renowned cancer hospital, and Massachusetts General, which is a world-renowned hospital. He spoke about the need for wider and more diverse clinical trial populations, discrimination against LGBTQ plus people, and the stigma of HIV. There's a clip in the first episode of Tim speaking at Dana-Farber. If you get the chance, check it out. I think it's pretty powerful, but again, I'm biased. So we, as widowers and widows, are navigating our own grief. At the same time, our grief gets discounted sometimes, and we are treated differently, just as some women, LGBTQ plus people, and people of color are oftentimes treated with condescension. All the while, we have to plan funerals, worry about money, close accounts, sometimes making numerous calls to close them, take on added home responsibilities, and grieve. Thank you for listening to my podcast. Try to be kind and have gratitude. I fall short on many days.